Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Adam Ganser, and I'm the Executive Director of New Yorkers for Parks. We co-founded the Playfair Coalition with the League of Conservation Voters and DC 37, which now stands at more than 400 organizations across the city, all focusing on advocating for our city's parks. We're also behind the 1% for Parks campaign. You heard from DC 37 about the on-the-ground reality of their work conditions and how our parks are faring. I'm going to put it a little bit more bluntly with some larger context. The city's support of our parks has been abysmal for 40 years. We're talking about a 40-year austerity plan. Some quick data points. New York City spends less on our parks as a percentage of the budget, per capita and per acre than all other major cities. This is the densest city in the United States. What's more, the Parks Agency over the last 40 years has continued to see its share of the city budget within the own city compared to other city agencies. While NYPD, the Department of Corrections, Sanitation, and the Department of Ed have all seen budget increases of 130% or more since 1980, Parks has seen an increase of just 70%. More to the point, this year alone, the city is spending more on NYPD overtime at $670 million than it spends on our park system. What has this resulted in? An inequitable park system. Parks that rely on inferior maintenance and safety strategies because the agency simply doesn't have enough staff. The lack of funding has a disproportionate and inequitable impact on the millions of New Yorkers, voters, who can't afford to live near parks that get private investment. It's time to invest in forward-looking policy with our parks that will make the city and its residents healthier and safer. Rather than the annual budget crumbs at the edge of the table, we're calling for a meaningful investment. First and foremost, we're calling for 1% of the city budget for parks. More specifically, we're looking for 1,000 baseline new junior level maintenance positions, more park rangers and PEP officers, investment in natural areas and our forests. Also, we're calling on the council to reinvest in the Playfair positions that it used to fund. This is 280 positions across lines that are so critical when we're seeing PEG cuts year after year. Just as an example, in the last year and a half, we've seen 500 positions eliminated in the Parks Department. We are very appreciative of the council's support of our platform, and we hope to see the same from the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Krishna.
Well, thank you all so much as advocates for your testimony today. That was both powerful and highlighting the clear needs that we have here in our city, too. I would like to also call special attention to the parks groups that are here, both for your work every single day to take care of our green spaces across our city and to advocate for more funding. And I just wanted to be clear before asking my question too, as we stated in our executive budget hearings and preliminary budget hearings this year, last year, the call for 1% for our budget for city parks not only is something that is not novel or radical, but it's catching us up to other cities across our country. But on top of that, that is something that this mayor explicitly campaigned on and stated the importance of parks and taking care of our parks. And so it is shocking that we still are fighting to make sure that we are getting there. We had the highest budget for parks last year, but it's nowhere near what it needs to be. And we expect to see a stronger commitment from this administration when it comes to taking care of our green spaces. A commitment that has so far not materialized despite the stated promises and commitments for several years now. On that note, one question I have is our council budget response called for 1,000 city parks workers, which would be an investment, as you all have testified to, in our parks workers and the staff who are the beating heart of our park system. And I just open it to any of you all on the panel to just give some testimony as to what would having 1,000 city parks workers for our parks department do to address some of the disparities that we're talking about here and to address the maintenance issues that we see in our parks.
Hi, Adam Ganser from New Yorkers for Parks. I mean, there's a couple things that really this starts to address. First is just a general shortage of staffing. I think we heard earlier a testimony on the number of PEP officers, which is now down close to 200. That's 200 PEP officers to monitor 30,000 acres of parkland across the city. The other thing is that over the last 40 years, the Parks Department has gone from a model where you had parks workers stationed in each park to mobile crews, which means that groups of 4 or 5 park workers are driving around the city to multiple parks during their shifts, getting there, and then not coming back for 3, 4 days or 5 days. We're looking for more parks workers to be stationed in parks, which increases certainly their eyes on the park for cleanliness, but also more engaged with the communities that are surrounding those parks to be responsive to the community needs and public safety needs. And those are just 2 examples. I mean, you're talking about levels of staffing now that are thousands fewer than what they used to be in the 70s and the 80s, and we're playing catch up both with the numbers and with the models that they're using.
Thank you, Adam. And I just wanted to also acknowledge that the Play Fair Coalition and New Yorkers for Parks have put out an excellent report highlighting these disparities between parks investments by other cities and how we in New York City have some of the least amount of dollars spent in our park system just in comparison to other cities across the country. Adam, isn't it correct, too, that over the last 40 years, last year's budget aside, there's been a steady decline in public dollars and public spending for our city's parks?
Yes, that is true. In the 70s, we were funding parks at close to 1.5% of the city budget. After the fiscal crisis and into the 80s, it went down to 0.5%, which is where it's hovered ever since. And actually, it got worse 2, 3 years ago during the pandemic when Parks Department was cut by $85 million, and our parks were in the worst situation that they'd ever been in since the Parks Department was recording that. I think the issue here is that we're continuing to negotiate based on last year's situation rather than zooming out and saying, what does the Parks Department need? What do New Yorkers need? The 1% for Parks campaign is exactly that, looking at other cities' models, maintenance models, and just general common sense, looking at how inequitable the city's park system is, where if you live around a park that gets private funding, you live in a beautiful park, and that may be your experience. You might think the rest of the city's parks looks like that. But for the millions and millions of other New Yorkers that don't have that luxury, that's not what they're experiencing.
And so isn't it a fact in your testimony, too, that 1% for cities' parks is not only catching up New York City to other cities across our country, but it's actually returning New York City to what it invested in our parks 50 years ago at this point?
That's exactly right, and I mentioned in my earlier testimony that the Parks Department we've not just fallen behind other cities, we've fallen behind other agencies. Most of the other agencies in the city have seen growth in the last 40 years of above 130%, whereas the parks has just grown, the budget has just grown by 70%. Parks Department is essentially a boots on the ground agency. You need people to be in the places where they're working, and we don't have that right now. Despite what the commissioner and the mayor say, we just need more people.
Absolutely, and it's shocking to think about how we're looking at returning to the 1970 standard, and again highlighting how this is not anything novel or radical, but frankly bringing back parks investments to what they have been. And wouldn't you also agree that as this public spending has gone down over the last 7 decades or so, the importance of parks as essential spaces for New Yorkers has only gone up, especially in the last several years given this pandemic?
Absolutely. First of all, you've seen the population of New York City grow by many, 1 million people over that same 40 years. We haven't had a significant increase in the number of parks over that same period of time. So just generally, there's more people in our parks. During COVID, you saw exponential increases, and that hasn't petered off. We did a survey about 6 months ago of park stewards who are saying they're seeing 10 to 20% more people in their parks during busy season. But what is maybe surprising is that's extending throughout the year. The city, it's a warmer place. People are outside more during the year than they used to be. And frankly, we're healthier people now than we were in 1970. We're not out smoking cigarettes on the corner. We're in our parks jogging. And so I think there's a real need that is not being met by this city. And it goes directly, obviously, to the inequity that we've talked about, but it's just also quality of life. What are we here for? We're here to be spending time in culture, as we've heard from other advocates, but also being able to live and survive in a city where green space is abundant and well maintained with our children and families and communities.